What would you do if a stranger walked into your backyard, accused you of trespassing on your own property, and then called the police on you? Jake Reynolds had been looking forward to this moment for weeks. After the stress of moving, unpacking, and dealing with a mountain of paperwork, today was finally the day he could relax. The sun was warm, the water in his pool sparkled, and his ice-cold lemonade sat within arm's reach. He leaned back in his lounge chair, book in hand, and exhaled a deep sigh of contentment. Then, a sharp, grating voice shattered the peaceful afternoon. "Excuse me. Who do you think you are?" Jake squinted against the sun, spotting a woman standing at the edge of his yard, arms crossed, mouth pursed like she'd just sucked on a lemon. She wore an expensive but tacky outfit, oversized sunglasses, a floral blouse that clashed violently with her hot pink capris, and a chunky gold necklace that screamed, "I think I'm important." Everything about her posture, from the way she jutted out her chin to the sheer audacity in her tone, radiated entitlement. He had never seen her before, but somehow, he knew, this woman was already his enemy. Amused, Jake stayed put, barely lifting his head from the lounge chair. I think I'm a guy enjoying his own pool." The woman huffed and marched closer, her heels clicking dramatically on the pavement. "You don't belong here." "Who let you in?" Jake blinked. "Let me in? Lady, I live here." She scoffed, folding her arms tightly across her chest. "That's impossible. I know everyone in this neighborhood. There's no way you own this house." Jake let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. Oh, this was going to be fun. Jake had dealt with plenty of difficult people in his life, but this woman, whoever she was on a whole new level. He could already tell that arguing with her was like trying to explain taxes to a toddler, completely pointless. "I've been living here for a month," he said, taking a slow sip of his lemonade. "Maybe you just weren't paying attention." Karen's lips pressed together so tightly they nearly disappeared. "I don't believe you," she snapped. "This house was vacant for a long time, and now suddenly some random man is lounging by the pool. You expect me to believe that?" Jake exhaled sharply, already tired of this nonsense. "Lady, believe whatever you want, but I'm not trespassing." Karen's face flushed with fury. "This is a good neighborhood. We don't allow vagrants hanging around private property." Her voice dripped with condescension. "You're obviously squatting here." Jake couldn't help it. He laughed. Loudly. "You think I'm homeless? Seriously?" Karen's hand shot into her purse, and before Jake could even process what was happening, she pulled out her phone and started dialing. "I'm calling the police," she declared. "We'll see what they think about some stranger pretending to own this house." Jake groaned and rubbed his temples. "Great. Let's waste some taxpayer dollars today." He stayed put as she stepped away, ranting into her phone, using dramatic phrases like, "potentially armed intruder," and, "immediate danger to the community." As if the real crime here wasn't that she was the nosiest human being on the planet. 15 minutes later, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the quiet suburban street. Jake turned his head slightly as two police cruisers pulled up in front of his house. The officers stepped out, one stocky with a weary expression, the other tall and sharp-eyed. Their hands hovered near their belts, prepared for whatever threat they had been told was lurking in the backyard. Karen, thrilled to finally have backup, rushed toward them, flailing her arms. "Officers. Thank God you're here. He's refusing to leave. He's dangerous." The cops exchanged glances before approaching Jake, who, to their apparent surprise, hadn't even bothered to stand up. He sat comfortably, sunglasses on, drink in hand, looking about as threatening as a retired Florida grandpa on vacation. The stocky officer sighed. "Sir, we received a report that you're trespassing on private property." Jake lazily lifted his sunglasses, squinting up at them. "That's news to me. Pretty sure I live here." Karen let out a dramatic gasp. "He's lying." This house was empty for months, and now suddenly he's here, acting like he owns the place. The cops looked at Jake, then at each other. They had clearly dealt with false reports before. Jake yawned and gestured lazily toward the small side table next to him. "Wallet's right there. Feel free to check my ID. My house keys are there too. Hell, I've even got some utility bills if you're feeling nostalgic." The taller cop picked up his ID, glancing between it and Jake's relaxed expression. "Jake Reynolds. This address matches. And those keys?" Jake picked them up and jingled them with a smirk. Karen's mouth twisted in frustration. "That doesn't prove anything. He could have stolen those keys, he probably faked that ID." The stocky officer let out a long, tired sigh. "Ma'am, faking a government-issued ID just to, what, sunbathe? Not exactly a typical crime." Karen's face turned red. "Check inside the house. I bet he doesn't even know what's in there. Ask him questions. If he's really the owner, he'll know what's inside." Jake exhaled through his nose, amused but slightly exhausted. The taller cop gave him an apologetic glance. "Sir, would you mind if we verified the house? Just to be sure." Jake stretched before standing up. "Go for it. Karen here seems invested in this mystery." The officers stepped inside, immediately greeted by a friendly golden retriever, who enthusiastically wagged his tail at the sight of his owner. They took a quick look around. Photos of Jake and his family lined the walls. His mail was stacked neatly on the counter, and everything inside clearly belonged to him. A few minutes later, they stepped back outside. Karen stood there, arms folded, looking smug. "Well?" she demanded. "Did you find anything suspicious? Did you catch him in a lie?" The stocky officer shook his head. "No, ma'am. This is clearly his house." Karen visibly twitched. "No. That can't be right." Jake leaned against the doorframe, grinning. "Well, Karen, looks like I'm not a squatter." "Bummer, huh?" The taller cop crossed her arms. "Ma'am, you just wasted police resources on a false report. Do you realize that?" Karen huffed, attempting to save face. "I was just looking out for the neighborhood. You can't be too careful these days." The officers didn't look convinced. The taller one scribbled in her notepad. "We'll be making a report about this. If you continue harassing your neighbor, there will be consequences." Karen gasped. "I'm the victim here." "What about him?" Jake smirked. "What about me? My only crime is existing near you." The cops gave Karen a final warning before heading back to their patrol cars. Jake, ever the gentleman, casually waved as Karen fumed, her face practically glowing red with rage. But as she stomped back to her house, Jake had a sinking feeling. This wasn't over. People like Karen didn't back down that easily. And as Jake sat back down in his lounge chair, he had no idea just how far she was willing to go next. Jake had hoped that after the police incident, Karen would finally take the hint and crawl back into whatever entitled cave she came from. But deep down, he knew better. People like her didn't accept defeat, they plotted comebacks. And sure enough, she struck again. It started with something small. A notice from the HOA. Jake pulled the letter out of his mailbox one morning, still groggy and half asleep, only to find himself hit with a $500 fine for disturbing the neighborhood peace. He blinked at the ridiculous claim. "Seriously?" he muttered, rubbing his temples. Apparently, Karen had complained that his incident with the police had caused an unacceptable disturbance, as if she hadn't been the one who called them in the first place. But that was just the beginning. The next day, another notice arrived. This time, it was about his pool. "Dear homeowner. Per HOA regulations, all pools must undergo an inspection to ensure they meet neighborhood safety standards. Failure to comply within 14 days will result in further penalties, *. Jake read the letter twice, then laughed dryly. Safety inspection? That was new, ***. His pool had been fine since the day he moved in, crystal clear, perfectly maintained. And yet, suddenly, the HOA was deeply concerned about it. He knew exactly who was behind this. He considered ignoring it, but something told him that would only make things worse. So, rolling his eyes, he scheduled the damn inspection. But Karen wasn't done. The next morning, his power went out. Jake had been in the middle of making coffee when the whole house suddenly went dark. He glanced out the window, expecting to see a citywide outage, ***, but every other house on the street still had power, ***. A sinking feeling settled in his gut. He grabbed his phone and called the electric company. Yeah, looks like a request was put in to have the power shut off at your address, the customer service rep said after a few minutes of looking into it. Jake frowned. ***, a request, ***, by who? There was a brief pause. It was submitted as a vacancy report. Someone claimed the house was abandoned. Jake closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. Karen. That absolute lunatic. He spent the next 2 hours on the phone, proving his residency, digging up utility bills, and having a technician sent out to restore his power. By the time everything was back on, his blood was boiling. But Karen wasn't finished. Later that evening, James Whitaker strolled up Jake's driveway, hands in his pockets and a knowing smirk on his face. You're not gonna like this. Jake, who had just finished resetting all the clocks in his house, groaned. Oh, what now? James handed him a HOA petition. She's trying to get you evicted. Jake stared at the paper. The words emergency meeting, discussion of possible eviction of Jake Reynolds were printed in bold. A handful of Karen's cronies in the HOA had signed it, which meant the board was now forced to hold a vote on whether he should be kicked out. Jake ran a hand down his face. This is insane. James nodded. Yeah, but you know how this works. HOA rules say if they get enough signatures, they can force a vote. He smirked. Karen's really going for the kill. Jake clenched his jaw. He'd expected petty harassment, but this? She was trying to destroy his life. He wasn't going to let her win. The night of the emergency HOA meeting, the community center was packed. Half the neighborhood had shown up, and tensions were high. Karen stood at the front of the room, speaking with fake concern. We just have to be careful about who we allow in our neighborhood, she said, shaking her head dramatically. We don't know anything about this man. He has no history here. He could be anyone. Jake sat in the back, arms crossed, fighting the urge to laugh. This woman was unhinged. A few of Karen's followers nodded along, but most of the room looked unconvinced. Susan Caldwell, the HOA president, sighed. Karen, we've already verified that Jake owns his house. The police confirmed it. The records confirm it. This is ridiculous. Karen put a hand on her chest. I just want to make sure our neighborhood stays safe. Is that such a crime? Before Susan could respond, James stood up from his seat, holding his phone in the air. I think it's time we show everyone who's actually causing trouble. He pressed play. On the screen, security footage from Jake's home played. The audience watched as Karen snuck onto Jake's property at night, pulling papers from his mailbox, peering through his windows, and making phone calls. A few gasps echoed in the room. Oh, but wait, it gets better, James said. He tapped the screen again. A new clip played. Karen, standing near Jake's fence, talking on the phone, her voice rang out loud and clear. Yes, I'd like to report an abandoned home. The owner is long gone. The place should be shut down. A stunned silence fell over the room. Karen's face went ghost white. Susan, looking absolutely done with this nonsense, turned to her. Karen. Explain this. Karen's mouth opened and closed. I was just. But it was too late. The room erupted into whispers. Jake saw neighbors shaking their heads in disgust. Even Karen's usual supporters started inching away from her. Susan rubbed her temples. Enough. The vote is cancelled. Jake isn't going anywhere, but if anyone should be removed from this community, I'd say it's the person who's been harassing their neighbor. Karen sputtered, her face twisting in rage. I was only doing what's right. But nobody was buying it anymore. As the meeting adjourned, Karen stormed out, her heels clicking violently against the floor. Jake, victorious but exhausted, watched her go and muttered, "She's not done yet." Because people like Karen never admitted defeat. And whatever she had planned next, it was going to be worse. Jake had won the battle, but he knew the war wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. If anything, the humiliation at the HOA meeting had only made her more determined. And that made her dangerous. For the next few days, things were eerily quiet. Too quiet. Karen had stopped glaring at him from across the street. No more passive-aggressive comments. No new HOA notices. No surprise complaints. It was like she had vanished. And that's exactly what made Jake uneasy. Then, one night, she made her move. It was close to 3 a.m. when a faint noise stirred Jake from sleep. He sat up, disoriented, listening. At first, he thought it was just the wind, until he heard it again. A scuffling sound. A metallic scrape. A low thud. Jake's pulse quickened. Someone was outside. Moving as quietly as possible, he reached for his phone and pulled up his security camera feed. His stomach clenched. There she was. Karen. In his backyard. She was wearing all black, hunched over near his fence, spray paint can in hand. Even through the grainy night vision, Jake could make out the words she was scrawling across his fence. Get out. Jake's jaw tightened. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was deranged. She finished defacing the fence, then moved toward his patio furniture, knocking over chairs, throwing a table onto its side. She was staging a break-in. Jake didn't hesitate. He dialed 911. By the time Karen finished her masterpiece of destruction, the distant wail of sirens cut through the quiet night. Her head snapped up in panic. Jake smirked. Busted. The moment she realized what was happening, she bolted toward her house. But it was too late. 2 squad cars came rolling down the street, red and blue lights flashing, illuminating her like a deer caught in headlights. Jake stepped onto his porch, arms crossed, as the officers approached her. Karen immediately turned on the waterworks. "Oh, thank God you're here," she gasped, pointing at Jake's house. "A burglar broke in. He trashed everything. You need to arrest him." The taller officer frowned. "Ma'am, we got a call about a trespasser on this property. And that trespasser is you." Karen's face froze. Jake leaned against the doorframe, grinning. "Hey, Karen. Smile for the cameras." The officer pulled out his notepad. "Mr. Reynolds, you have security footage?" Jake held up his phone. "Oh yeah. Crystal clear." Karen's entire body stiffened as the officers watched the footage of her vandalizing the property. One of them let out a low whistle. "Well, that's about as open and shut as it gets." Karen started panicking. This is taken out of context," she stammered. "You don't understand." He. The stocky officer shook his head. "Ma'am, you filed a false police report, vandalized private property, and trespassed. That's 3 separate crimes." Karen looked around wildly as if hoping someone would come to her rescue. But the street was silent. Then, the officer reached for his cuffs. "Turn around, ma'am." Karen let out a shriek. "You can't do this. I'm the victim." But no one was listening anymore. The cuffs clicked shut around her wrists, and as the officers escorted her to the squad car, Jake could hear her ranting about lawsuits, conspiracies, and how she was just protecting the neighborhood. James strolled up next to Jake, sipping a beer. "Phew. Took long enough." Jake chuckled, watching the patrol car pull away. "Think that's the last of her?" James snorted. "Doubt it. But this is gonna be one hell of a wake-up call." And for the first time in weeks, Jake finally felt like he could breathe. Karen's arrest wasn't just a win for Jake, it was a victory for the entire neighborhood. For years, she had tormented people with her self-righteous entitlement, and now, finally, she was facing real consequences. But the fallout wasn't over yet. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word spread fast, and by noon, everyone knew Karen had spent the night in jail. Some whispered about whether she'd actually do time, while others simply rejoiced in the peace and quiet her absence had brought. Even the HOA, which had once bent over backward to accommodate her, distanced itself immediately. Then came the final blow. Susan Caldwell, the HOA president, delivered a formal notice to Karen's house. She had been fined $5,000 for harassment, false police reports, and property damage. The fine wasn't negotiable. Either she paid, or the HOA would escalate the matter legally. For a few days, Karen stayed hidden inside her house, blinds drawn, refusing to acknowledge the disaster she had created for herself. But she couldn't ignore reality forever. Soon, the consequences piled up. Her husband, tired of her antics and embarrassed beyond belief, filed for divorce. She lost the support of her few remaining friends in the HOA, who now wanted nothing to do with her. And when she finally emerged, it was only to plant a "for sale" sign in her yard. Jake woke up one morning, stretched, and saw the sign. He stared for a moment, then grinned. About damn time. A month later, Karen was gone. The neighborhood felt lighter, like a dark cloud had finally lifted. No more surprise HOA fines, no more ridiculous complaints, and best of all, no more cops showing up because a grown woman threw a tantrum. The new homeowners arrived soon after, a friendly, completely normal young couple. When Jake introduced himself, the husband, Matt, chuckled and said, "Oh, we know who you are. Your story went viral. My wife saw it on Reddit, and when we saw this house listed, she went, 'Wait, isn't that the Karen house?'" Jake nearly dropped his drink laughing. "You bought it because of that?" Matt shrugged. "It was a great deal. And hey, if the worst problem in this neighborhood was already taken care of, why not move in?" Jake smirked and raised his glass. "Welcome to the neighborhood. Hope you don't mind a little excitement." As the sun set over his peaceful backyard, Jake finally did what he had been trying to do since day one, relax by his pool, uninterrupted. No Karen, no drama, just peace. Because at the end of the day, karma always wins. Have you ever dealt with a nightmare neighbor or an overzealous HOA? Share your stories below, let's see who had it worse.